Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Beef, Season 1, Episode 4. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So immediately, Amy and Paul, they're kind of, talking. I love that he came up with parking, and she's like, you mean like a valet? He's like, no. But, they could get to you, anywhere. I'm like, I get it, but it's just kind of like, It does exist. It's called a valet, but I guess you want to make it like an Uber valet. It makes sense in a place where you can't have valet. It would probably help out a lot, in places that don't have it or something. So I get the idea behind it. I'm like, okay, but it's there's already a word for it. But it's hey, you want to find that niche. What is like a Lyft or an Uber, if not just a taxi. You just take something that already exists, you put your own spin on it, and you make bank. So I could see that being a thing, but nevertheless, I was surprised Amy ended up telling the truth. It's right, I am married, so we can't let this happen. I also love that she's like, yeah, show me where you live. It took me a second to be like, oh wait, I forgot. You can't let him know you already know where he lives, so you got to let him point you in a direction where. But it's yeah, of course. She doesn't know exactly what built, but she knows the general area. She knows what motel you're living at. So either way, she wanted the Vegas situation to be a family thing, but her daughter just likes the comfort of home. It's probably never left home. I guess George and Amy haven't done any leaving, maybe specifically their home since no trips. So maybe she's scared of airplane, but she started melting down. But it might just be right. She likes what she likes, and she doesn't want to kind of get out of that comfort zone. So George decides he's going to stay, and Amy goes to Vegas by herself. She did let Paul know, so I was Paul's probably going to try and find his way to Vegas, especially because he was yo, I got one of my boys is in Vegas, an up and coming MMA fighter. So hey, I could swing by. So. And at the same time, this is all happening, Paul, Isaac and Danny are hanging out more, which I think is so interesting how much of an impact. It's still not. There's good and bad with the Isaac and Paul situation. The Isaac and Danny situation, but Paul and Amy, there's good and bad that comes with that too. And I think those pairings ended up causing even more complicated friction between Danny and Paul. But either way, I love the whole conversation about oh yeah, this Kayla chick. It's and Danny's calling it that white devil. He's calling her the white devil Kayla, because it's yeah, Paul's cleaning his room and stuff like that. It's yeah, because she's pulling his strings. He's I don't mess with those type of white women. So, and Isaac's so what kind of white women you mess with? He's Italians. It's really? He's yeah. They're I guess it's he's kind of saying it's a peninsula thing, Korea and Italy, it's right, kind of we kind of come from a similar place in that regard. We're kind of similar in who we are. So I thought that was such an interesting conversation. But we do kind of get more context on what the church scam is. It is hey, we're gonna basically, it is to steal all that loan money, but I guess they're gonna keep the place in perpetual repair rather than actually getting the place actually repaired. They're gonna bring in all this stuff to make it seem like they spruced the place up while pocketing the $100,000 for themselves. It's so interesting too, because I think because of that church stuff, he is planning on robbing them blind with this loan stuff. Danny still did pull away stuff from it, because for him, it made him go man, I might want to apologize. I want to apologize to that road rage lady. I'm going to apologize. And then on top of that, I need to make things right with Paul, which I thought was kind of sweet. He wanted to make things right, because it's I just don't want to end up doing too much that ends up pushing my brother away. We haven't been in a good spot for, it doesn't seem like it's just a recent thing. It's been a thing for a long time. But obviously it also comes down to that upbringing situation too, of right, when you're the oldest, you get it the worst. And yeah, it's always worse for the first, because especially Isaac was yeah, it's kind of that Asian parent thing of yeah, the oldest gets all the ass whoopings, and then when the youngest comes around, it's yeah, they've calmed down since then or something. I can't say anything. I'm the baby of my family. I have 2 older sisters, so I definitely know they, at least from my upbringing, I remember them getting it rougher, definitely rougher than I ever. To be fair, I never did anything. I'm the introvert of the family, so like I always kept to myself. I did some stupid stuff, but it was never a situation where it's like, never got to the level of like trouble my siblings ever gotten into and stuff like that. But either way, Paul, it is kind of messed up that Paul did what he did, because Danny was like, hey, I'm going to turn this, like, we could take this as a trip or whatever. I also love what was that line? I'd never heard the G word before. I'm not even going to say it. It's a derogatory term for Korean people, because Isaac was like, yo, like, because he was like, oh, sup Isaac. He was like, sup Isaac. Isaac Hyung. He's like, I don't come up with like these G rules, but it is what it is. Give me a full frontal hug, like none of that side hug, yeah, like, let's go tip to tip. And he's just like, oh, why'd you have to say that? Like, legitimately, I'd never heard that term before, and that word, until like, I want to say David So was the first time I ever heard that term. Very funny comedian dude on YouTube. But yeah, like, because I've never heard that derogatory term before. I want to say David So was my introduction to that, but maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, my point before I was circling back, it's Paul was like, yo, Danny was like, yeah, like, let's make this like a bros trip. But Paul was like, nah, yeah, sure, and even Danny was like, yo, we got some money coming on the way, so I'll actually pay you good, and you can pay for your own way there. And he's like, oh, cool. I mean, I get it. You know that Amy's going to be in Vegas now, so you have to go now. But if you went ahead and was like, yo, let this be a trip, they know you're going for your girl, which obviously, like, he pissed off Isaac by being like, he's like, oh yeah, she wanted this dick. He's like, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. He's like, oh, I bet you saw plenty of them in prison. He's like, what'd you say to me? He's like, you better apologize. It's like, yo, Isaac's got a really, really, I mean, it isn't just a Danny thing. Like, Isaac's got a short temper too. I mean, understandably, it's like, you don't joke about someone's jail time like that, especially because it's not even like, it's still a fresh wound, obviously. So, but yeah, he was like pretending to drink so that they would get drunk. It's also super effed up because he would spit it back in a bottle and then pour, like, it was an extra middle finger to them, because it's like, not only am I not getting drunk, I'm getting you drunk. I'm also putting it in my mouth and spitting it back in the bottle and serving it to you. It was like a double middle finger. And yeah, he ended up stealing the keys. And like, bro, if you had just said like, all right, I'm going to go do my thing, you go do yours, it's fine. They would have been okay with that, but you had to be a dick and kind of get them drunk and steal their car. And that once again, it's just like everything kind of plays into itself. Like every move Paul made this episode kind of like pushed him further and further away from Danny. And, because especially when Isaac was talking to him, like, oh yeah, like, how, because he was like, oh yeah, the Skittles and Coke thing. He's like, oh, remember getting so high, you vomited everywhere, and it was like, it came out like rainbows because you were eating so many Skittles. And later on, Paul was like, oh, this is something I came up with. I'm like, is that the case? Because Danny was like, no, I came up with it, but he said that Paul would copy him. It's back when Paul looked up to him. And they used to give him that nickname like Johnny Carson. And he was like, oh yeah. But Isaac was like, no, that's not a cool name. He was making fun of you. He's like, no, he wasn't. It's like, yeah, dude, to us, Johnny Carson was the man. But he started calling you Johnny Carson like after like, I guess, after he had died. And I guess like, I'd never heard that about Johnny Carson, but I mean, I'm not well versed in Johnny Carson enough to know. I guess stuff came out later on about his anger and stuff like that. So, and for like something that was kind of like a sweet childhood thing, something that kind of connected him and his brother, now it's like, oh, like it wasn't meant as a compliment. It was meant to be a dig against me. So that is jacked up. So they're trying to find Paul. All they wanted was to find Paul so that Paul could give them the keys back, because all the stuff they stole that they were going to use for this church scam is in the back of the truck. That's all they wanted, but Paul was trying to do everything. He wasn't picking up Danny's texts and stuff like that. It's like, that's kind of on him, but he also met up with Amy because Amy was alone in a hotel room, and she wanted the company. I mean, it was also sweet that George is having, like, his sleepover with his mom. So I was like, oh, that's actually kind of really sweet and stuff. But George has kind of got his, like, men's gathering thing or whatever But because Amy's supposed to be, Jordan told her like, oh, you're going to be on this panel after she met with some of the board members, and they want her to speak. And you could tell, I think Amy had a reluctance to immediately go back home because there's so much complicated stuff back home with George. Like, there's stuff with the whole Mia situation. But there's that, plus it's just not so quick to like get back to life, because now you get to probably take a break, because probably since having June, they've probably been like, it's been grind. You haven't really had any time for yourself. And so that's why she enjoyed their time with Paul so much. It's like, right, nothing can happen between us, but they both like smoke and get high. Like, she hasn't done that since June was born. And it's like, why? And she's like, I don't know, I guess life just got so busy, just never had an opportunity. So she got to just kind of relax, and she got to open up with Paul about everything, about the deal that's coming up about, with 10 mil. That's how much she's going to get from this Jordan deal. But the thing is, to get that full 10 mil, it means, like I said, I don't know if it's going to be like an installment over years, or is it going to be a lump sum payment? Is it up front, but she still has to grind out for the 5 years to keep up the contract? Or will she get the 10 mil at the end of that 5 year? I'm assuming it's the latter, not the former. But, which even Paul's like, yo, I'd be good with a milli. But for Amy, it's like, yeah, in my 20s, I would have said the exact same thing. But from who I am now, it's not just about me. It's not about yourself anymore. Because for her, it's like, she's married, she has a home that she redesigned herself, and she has a daughter. It's like, I have other people I have to consider beside myself. Like, as a kid, in your 20s, it's like, hell yeah, a meal, I'm good, bro. I can make that work. As you got other obligations when you're older, like especially if you have a family, like in her regard. So, and Paul even opened up about his brother and like what his real issue is with with Danny. For him, it's like Danny. He's like, I see how hard he works for everyone else but himself. It's like, at the end of the day, he's like, I know my brother's depressed. He literally drives an hour and a half out of the way to go to the Burger King, not because it's the best. It's just so that he could get those 4 like chicken sandwiches by him and eat them by himself, which we've seen him do that twice so far in the show. And I even love Amy being like, huh. Like, once again, I keep reiterating this over the past reviews. I think because Amy's starting to learn more about Danny. Danny hasn't really learned anything about Amy, but the more she learns about Danny, the more I think she starts feeling a little sympathetic, because she realizes like, all right, he's like angry and stuff like that. But because I think she sees some parallels between them, that it's like, oh, like that's what, like I think she especially when she said that line of, right, the brokenness of someone, you can't let them stick around, because that's why he doesn't like Danny so much. It's like, yo, I don't want that negativity around me. Like, my bro is just like, I think he's legitimately sad, and it's just like, maybe at one point in time they were good, but as they gotten older, their relationship strained because of that, Once again, it's that thing of, yeah, you work so hard and you're not doing anything for yourself. And Amy's kind of in that same boat. She works so hard for everyone else and not really for herself. And that was the whole point she brought up to George. So I think, previously about like, right, I have all this stuff, but I can't really enjoy it because I'm too busy like grinding it out at work. So I think in that moment, she kind of started feeling a little sympathetic of like, oh, I know who, maybe her rage towards him is so rare that she can't. I mean, that's the point. You're so blinded by rage, you can't see anything else. But it's like, if under different circumstances, they could have clicked because there's so much commonality between them. So, luckily, nothing did happen between the two of them, because Amy wanted to make sure nothing actually happened. And I love that she paid him, and he's like, oh, you don't have to. She's like, no, I just want to give you a thank you because you've done so much for me. He's like, wow, I kind of feel like a whore. She's like, keep talking like that, you'll end up in the bed. But I was kind of scared like something would happen, but it seems like nothing did. And that entire night, you had like Danny and Isaac. I love Isaac's like, no, you guys sit with the Chinese. You see them playing like craps and all that too. And he's like, yeah, I see them all the time. He's like, no, those are like half Chinese. He's like, I'm talking about the OGs who kind of know the game. You gotta sit with them. He's like, yo, I'm lucky. I'm definitely gonna win. And everything went south, and they ended up losing a lot of money. And Isaac was just like pissed drunk. And it's like, okay, you need to get food in your belly. And Isaac's like, dude, I've never had anyone look out for me. This is exactly what I needed. You are hooking me up with what I need. I was like, it's actually really sweet. Like them bonding. They see Danny. I mean, they see Paul. Paul takes off running, so they chase after him, and I love they have to go up the stairs because Amy is. It's like, oh, why does her room have to be so high? It's just like. It's like all he had to do was like, yo, give us the keys. But the moment he saw Isaac, like he took off running because it's like, oh, why did you do that? If you had just picked up your phone and instead of turning it off when they were trying to look for you, then like, hey, it'd be all fine because all they wanted was the stuff out of the truck. And so Lisa, this whole funny chase sequence, they're going up the stairs, and Isaac's like, oh, I'm going to beat you up for making me run, and I'm like, not feeling good too. It's like, you have no loyalty. And I love Danny being like, Johnny Carson, was that a compliment or not? And Paul's like, I don't even know who that is. So it's like, okay. So going up, I don't know if they were at the very bottom or not, but like, because Amy's on like the top floor. She's like in like the 40s and stuff, so I thought it was like, okay, Amy's going to go back to her room because she was getting her phone because she wanted to show like, hey, this is what I want to look like. But I thought she would have had a run-in with all of them, and then we would have had that moment of like, hey. But no, we didn't. Because Danny doesn't know that the person that Paul is seeing is the road rage lady. But also, Paul doesn't know that Amy's the road rage lady because she's kind of keeping that to herself, being like, yeah, the reason why I connected to you initially is because, and probably the moment he finds out, that's going to be earth-shattering, that like, oh, were you always getting close to me just to get back at my brother? It's like, that wasn't the case. It initially started that way, but I could definitely see that still messing him up big time, because especially because he thinks like, oh, you connected with me because like we connected, and it's obviously he's talking about especially because Paul applied so much of what Amy said and was like, yo, I'm getting rid of your brokenness, I won't let it kind of consume me. So they get to the top floor. I love that Isaac's throwing up down the stairs because he's drunk, got food on his stomach, and he's like, running up these stairs after Paul. They get in the same room, and like I love that Paul was like about to get his ass beat by Isaac, but then like it's like, right, we just want the keys and let's go. And Danny went off on calling him pathetic. He's like, all the stuff I've ever done for you, and it's like and even one point in time, he was running his mouth off, and like Danny just slapped Paul. And it's just kind of like, yo, I had enough of your shit. Like, you always treat me like I'm the older brother. Like, show me respect, And he's like, I can take you. And then Danny's just looking at him like, yeah, right. And just pushes past him. It's like, damn, dude. Because it's really heartbreaking. Like I said, there's circumstances that evening ended up like shifting, like their time in Vegas, like because once again, Danny was like listening to Isaac and hanging out with Isaac, because it's almost like Isaac's the brother. Like, I spent so much time worrying about my own brother who hates me when I should have been hanging out with Isaac, because it's like we lost touch so long ago. And obviously Paul was listening to Amy, so it ends up causing a larger division. Especially, once again, it's sadder because Danny had the intentions of like filling that gap. He wanted things to be right between him and Paul, and so for things to kind of be what they are now is really sad, because that's the type of shit that can like destroy like sibling relationships is such an easy thing for things to go super sideways. And not just like, oh, we're pissed at each other for a little bit and we move on. It's like, it can lead to like years of resentment and us not talking, which is, and it's like maybe we only gather at weddings and funerals type of shit, and even then it's like, you don't talk to each other, you don't interact with each other, So, I don't know, I've seen that, stuff firsthand, so it is that thing of like, that sibling relationship is to me such a delicate relationship. So, and I feel bad because this could be the nail in a coffin for like Paul and Danny, but I mean, who knows? But like, because it's definitely not sitting well with Paul, like Danny hitting him and stuff like that. It's just kind of like trying to make me feel pathetic, make me feel low, and it's like that brokenness is like kind of, because he's looking at his brother like Paul is looking at Danny like he's pathetic, Danny's looking at Paul like he's pathetic. But like, would he have even said that if things had played out a little differently, if they wouldn't have gotten to this point, sadly, But also, it's years of unresolved issues. It's Danny having his view on his brother. It's Paul having views on his brother about how they look at each other, how they view each other, and it's been bubbling beneath the surface. It just finally popped off in this moment. So So all the while this is happening, Amy's on stage giving her speech, and lo and behold, they end up running into Amy. They see her giving a speech, and it's like, oh yeah, it's all like connected. It's like, oh, how poetic that we would be here. It's like, right, once again, you don't know that the universe brought you together because you only came here looking for Paul and his girl that you didn't run into, because you still don't know it even by the end of the episode that it's Amy. So I love that Danny got on the mic, asked a question. I thought it was going to be Isaac really blasting, because I thought Danny was going to have his reservations. But for him, it's just like he's already hyped up because of everything with Paul. And it's just kind of like, right, screw it. And he went off on Amy because I think he had to sit there and listen to her pretend to be someone. It's like, oh, I know who you really are. And went on about his vehicle and stuff. And she just labeled it as like, oh, wow, they're crazy. So they like scrap with security, end up running. And obviously, Danny's like, dude, where's the key? Like, do we have it? He's like, no, dude, I don't have it. You do. And because he even spit in one of the guards' faces and punched him. And just as they get arrested at the end of the episode is when his car keys fall out of his pocket. You're like, oh, how poetic in that moment. I mean, because they could have, and also it's poetic. I mean, just like fate is interesting and funny because they were so like drunk and also like hyped up from the chase with Paul. They completely missed a sign telling them like the garage is this way. They went past like the sign that says like the garage is this way. So it is that thing of maybe it is fate in some regards. But I think the whole situation, especially like Amy, like this makes the decision that she's going to keep working with Jordan. That's also a thing too. Jordan and Amy have definitely bonded more because Jordan convinced her like, hey, you got to dress down a little bit more that way because the people around me are middle class, and the fact is that, you know, they're not going to be too keen on you kind of like living it up lavishly because that's not the life they have. So it is a thing of she has to kind of pretend around other people, but the people in her inner circle, she doesn't have to pretend as much. And we see things with her sister-in-law where it's like, oh, hey, was it Naomi? It's like, oh, like, Amy, you want to hang out? And so, no, Amy's going to go to this conference thing with me. Okay. And then later on, like, they end up walking past Naomi and completely ignoring her. And you're like, oh, wow, that's probably going to be an issue. Because once again, I brought it up previously, like how every time there was a conversation, Naomi would constantly reference Jordan, like, oh yeah, my sister-in-law. Like, she tried to make it seem like the relationship was so one thing, but I think it's not. I think the relationship isn't the way she kind of makes it up. I mean, the way she was talking about it, yeah, she comes to me for advice all the time. They never had that close of a relationship, and I'm sure it's going to rub her the wrong way that Amy and her have one. So I think that's definitely going to be interesting, especially when you consider the fact is that after hearing that whole conversation, especially when Danny referenced what car that she drives, that now it's like that guy out there was the red truck, wait, the white vehicle. It's like, could it be Amy's? She doesn't have any proof, but that does indicate now, because like everyone's seen that video, so if word gets out that it was Amy, that could be an issue. And Naomi could use it as an opportunity to drive a wedge between her and Jordan, just so she can be back in Jordan's good graces. Once again, we don't know if she was ever in Jordan's like great graces. It's like, yeah, you're married to my brother, but that's it. Like, it's not really a situation of we were never really that close to begin with. I mean, maybe they were. We'll have to wait and see. But I can see Naomi definitely using this to her advantage. And then you have at the very, very end, Amy kind of gloating as Danny and Isaac get arrested. I mean, Isaac's in a bad position because he's already on parole. And like any chance of forgiveness, it's like, nah, we're done. As Amy's there gloating, wagging her finger, Danny's just like seething. So where all this ends up taking us going forward, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. I'm interested to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.